To win at the racetrack, you need luck. To win at the casinos, you need luck. To win a case, you need experience, dedication, and know-how. Ed Bernstein and Associates won a $104 million verdict. Enough said. Call Ed.
Call me.
Attention, if you have taken the blood thinner Pradaxa or dabigatran and have suffered or been hospitalized for internal bleeding or hemorrhagic stroke, you may be entitled to compensation. Call Edward M. Bernstein and Associates immediately. Enough said. Call Ed. 240-0000. Attention Yaz or Yasmin users. If you have taken the oral contraceptive Yaz or Yasmin and have been diagnosed with deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, heart attack, you may be entitled to compensation.
Enough said. Call Ed.
If you've taken any of those drugs, call me now. We're going to talk about some of those drugs that you just saw the commercials for at the break with attorney Michael Lynch, who is nationally renowned attorney, handle a lot of these, well, I'll call them drug cases for lack of a better term, but you know, it seems like there's more and more products that come out. We see more and more commercials for products and for suing the companies that manufacture these products. And then you hear at the same time that less products and less drugs are being manufactured because of patent issues and lawsuits and things like that. And what's really going on?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to come on the show. It's always a pleasure, and it's always great seeing you. Back to your question, you're exactly right as to two things. We're seeing lots of drugs that folks are suing over, and we're seeing less drugs come out. There's two reasons. One, about 5 years ago, I thought the pharmaceutical companies couldn't do any worse, meaning maybe we had seen kind of the end of the flow of this constant stream of dangerous products that were coming out. And then, sure enough, a few years later, once again, we see 3 or 4 major drugs that are the subjects of recalls or serious health concerns. And at the same time, then you see companies that are protecting their kind of golden lambs, Lipitor or other drugs that have a strong safety profile, and they're kind of inhibiting the progress of other drugs through patents and putting drugs on generics. The pharmaceutical companies are always looking for the next best thing, and unfortunately the consumer is always looking for the next best thing. Some of the best drugs out there are drugs that have been around for a long, long time, that have long safety profiles, that we know what they're going to do and when they're going to do it to whom. I always would want to say is with folks, you always got to beware of the next greatest thing with a pharmaceutical product, or the next greatest thing in terms of a hip implant or some other medical device, because those are the ones in all likelihood haven't been tested adequately. What I mean tested adequately is the clinical trial process only allows for so much testing. The real test of any product is what happens when it gets out into the population. And that's also a test of what a drug company will do, because we can't expect the drug companies to know everything about a drug until it gets in the market. But it's what they do after they begin to see problematic concerns over a drug, if you begin to see safety profile concerns, if you begin to see deaths and hospitalizations, how that company acts in the face of that data. And
because oftentimes they hide it.
They hide it, they ignore it, they brush it under with a lot of other data, because we have the watchdog of the United States, the FDA, which is overburdened, understaffed, and sadly, in many circumstances, in the back pocket of industry.
Because aren't a lot of FDA employees go on to then work for drug companies?
They do. Some of them go right from FDA work to work in the pharmaceutical companies themselves, the very ones that they've been reviewing, they go right to work for. But then also there's something known as what are advisory boards within the FDA. Outside experts that constitute boards that make opinions as to whether or not drugs should be approved or stay on the market. The problem is that 80%, 90% of those individuals have some type of conflict of interest, because they're paid in some way, either as spokesmen or they do clinical trials for the very companies that they're espousing an opinion on. Now, there are some disclosures that they have to tell you about that, but even if if I say I make a lot of money from Merck, does that do away with that conflict? It discloses it, but in my mind, it doesn't do away with the real conflict of the same people trying to look after our health and safety and welfare are the ones that are getting paid by the individuals who make these drugs.
You said earlier, and oftentimes there's a drug that suffices, but then the drug company will come out with the newer, better kind of drug. Pradaxa. You know,
Pradaxa is a great example.
I did a commercial at the break about Pradaxa. Replacing what, Coumadin?
Coumadin. What we have with Coumadin, Coumadin has been around for over 50 years. Is being on Coumadin the funnest thing in the world? No, it's not. I mean, Coumadin's a tough drug to be on.
And why is that?
Well, just because Coumadin has a lot of problems. A lot of people feel very weak on it, headaches, and there's some more serious problems where you can get some bleeds from Coumadin.
And but you have to be tested. And
be tested about every week or two. You have to get pricked. You
Right.
have to measure what's known as your INR.
Right.
Now, that's not exactly fun, and that's not exactly also convenient for some people. If you don't have a ride to your doctor's office every 2 weeks, and you can't get tested, Coumadin might not be appropriate for you.
Right,
But
and you get tested because they moderate up and down the dose based upon your testing.
and without that, you know, you could be getting too much Coumadin or too little, because Coumadin treats what's known as a condition, the clotting that comes from what's known as an irregular heartbeat, known as atrial fibrillation. You have that, your heart flutters abnormally, you throw out some clots. Now that clot can go to your brain, and you can get a stroke.
It can be very dangerous, and typically it's very common among the elderly population.
Right. So you see a lot of people on Coumadin. Now, what happened with Pradaxa is that a German company known as Boehringer Ingelheim developed what they said was essentially the best case anticoagulant. You can take it, but don't have to get monitored, don't have to get pricked. And also, they said it had a better safety profile. Well, what they did is they kind of rigged a clinical trial. When you do a clinical trial with a drug, what you should have essentially is what's known as a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, meaning some people get sugar pills, some people get the drug. No one knows who's on what. You have an investigator that doesn't know who got what and just makes a determination. Did this happen? Did this happen? Now, in this case, what they did is they didn't do one of those. What they did is what's known as an open label study. So everyone knew if someone was getting Coumadin or someone was getting Pradaxa. Now, what does that do, however? Most of these clinical trial individuals have conflicts of interest. They're getting paid by Boehringer Ingelheim to be the clinical investigator. And lo and behold, not unexpectedly, we began to see a better safety profile, at least in the reported results for Pradaxa. What happens after Pradaxa comes out in October of 2010? We began to see an absolute epidemic of uncontrollable, and it's an important word, uncontrollable gastrointestinal bleeds. Individuals get on Pradaxa, usually within a few months, sometimes even a few days, you get an uncontrollable internal bleed that cannot be stopped. And the biggest difference between Coumadin and Pradaxa is that Coumadin essentially has kind of a safety mechanism, and it sounds weird, but it's known as vitamin K. Meaning you can go and take some vitamin K from the medicine cabinet or go to the hospital and get a shot, and your bleeding will stop almost in its tracks. With Pradaxa, you can't. There's no way to stop it. So people go into hospitals, they hang blood after blood on them, and essentially they pray that they hopefully will get better. And I have well over 100 clients that, and many of them did not survive, meaning I'm not speaking to the client, I'm speaking to the son or daughter or, or husband or wife that went into a hospital with a gastrointestinal bleed for Pradaxa, stayed for several days and never made it out. And the drug is still on the market, it still doesn't have a black box, but I will predict that you're going to see a black box on Pradaxa, and very, very soon, hopefully by the end of the year, you're going to see a huge downturn in the use of Pradaxa on patients, because I almost think it's approaching a national health crisis, is the use of Pradaxa in a patient population that was pretty safe on Coumadin.
Yeah.
So you never should have been on it in the first place.
Explain what a black box is.
Okay. When anyone gets a product, it's going to come with that big list of warnings, page after page.
Right.
And to be honest, almost no one reads it. However, what the FDA can require on certain drugs is what's known as a black box warning. Literally, it's a black box. Big, bold letters surrounded that will give you the most important warning. Don't take this with alcohol. This can cause uncontrollable bleeding. It gives you the condensed, most important information that you could have as to a product. Now that usually is, it could be in some circumstances, the death toll for a product. Because once you really let someone know how bad something is, a lot of times the patients will say, well, I won't take this.
It scares them.
Scares them, and usually rightfully so. And there's been numerous examples of drugs that have been on the market doing very, very well. And there's two birth control devices. So one's a pill and one's kind of a device that I can talk about that you began to see that were very, very popular. once the black box come out or the warning comes out, you begin to see their usage almost go down to nothing.
But sometimes the opposite is true as well, that a black box warning will come out and people somewhat tend to ignore it.
Well, what it can do also is that it also can really improve the safety profile, because if you just adequately warn, maybe this population shouldn't use it or this, what you're doing is making the drug safer. If you're over 75, don't take it. As long as people over 75 really know not to take it, what that's going to do is make that drug much, much safer for everybody, because the right people are going to be taking it. The problem with drugs like Pradaxa is that there's only so much you can warn. You can't warn someone that this is going to kill you if it really is going to kill you. There's no amount of warning that's going to make that drug safe in my mind. The only thing that you could do is do what I think would be the proper thing, is to ask for it to be withdrawn from the market. Now, that could be a voluntary action by the company, which hardly ever happens, or it can be spurned on by the FDA.
I'm going to ask you my very naive question. Why wouldn't the drug company want to put specific warnings in so avoid lawsuits, the kind that you're handling now, just by putting the warning in and being truthful and honest about the side effects of the drug? Like Pradaxa, for instance, you said there's not yet a black box warning. There's been a lot of lawsuits for several years now with Pradaxa, and the company still has not put a black box warning. Why?
Comes down to money. Very simple answer. They're worried that if they put that black box warning on Pradaxa, that all the physicians that used to have their patients on Coumadin will just revert right back to Coumadin. And they're probably right. What does that mean is that they're putting profits over patient safety. And that's really what the key is. Many times companies will wait as long as they can to put that black box, because every day that they don't have a black box in there is probably going to be another day where they're going to have that drug on the market and make money. Now, in Pradaxa's case, I think if a black box comes out, it's going to be great for the consumer. It's going to be very bad for the company. It's in the interest of public health to do it, not in the interest of their bottom line.
And the doctors are kind of in the middle of this.
Yes.
Because I assume that they're relying on the information that they've gotten from the drug company before they prescribe something to the patients.
I almost never sue doctors. In my 16-year career of only suing pharmaceutical companies, I don't think I've ever sued a doctor. The reason being is that the doctors essentially get that same information that the patient has. They get what's on the label. And if the label doesn't say X, Y, or Z, and if the company knew it, which is even worse, the doctor's in a terrible position. And many times doctors really, really feel upset when they see one of their patients have a problem from a drug. They take it very personally and professionally. And sometimes they're quite angry, because doctors are 99.9% of them are really good folks, and they feel badly and they feel betrayed when pharmaceutical companies don't give them adequate information to treat their patients.
And of course, what they're typically who they're typically communicating with are the salespeople, the sales force of the drug company that is making a commission to go sell to the doctors this drug for use.
And if you ever seen a pharmaceutical sales rep, usually it's an attractive person, bearing gifts, bagels or lunch, speaks well, has great personality, and essentially is just there as a salesperson. And they don't know, once again, anything more than the drug company tells them. And usually it's a couple billboards and a couple of studies, and play nice with the doctor and be friendly and be the type of person that any salesman is, which is to try to get your product sold. And they just don't know even enough. It all comes back to what the company tells them.
How does the FDA allow these drugs to be approved without the double-blind studies?
Well, they can, but
you learned that in chemistry, right?
Yeah, which is right. You can't really do a real test unless something is placebo-controlled or at very least double-blind, where you can have two different things and you don't have a control, but you can't know which is which. How do they let it do it is that, first of all, the FDA is trying to see more drugs on the market. One of the things that you hear a lot of people complain about the FDA in this country is, well, there's a great drug in Canada, there's a great drug in France or something. And we do want to see more good drugs out there. However, in the manner in which we get those drugs to approval has to be under a lot of scrutiny. And nowadays we begin to see a couple things that have really come under scrutiny. One, Pradaxa, I think, is going to change the way in which pharmaceutical products are approved. And also the hip implant, the Dupuis ASR hip implant, which was a metal-on-metal hip implant that came out in 2005, was approved under the auspices of kind of very infrequently used protocol in the FDA where you didn't even actually have to test that hip implant on live people because they said it was substantially the same as other products that were on the market. It was a 501(k) approval process, which now you really can't do anymore. So what happens usually is that if there's an approval process that turns out not to be right, and the ASR hit that showed that you have to have human testing, and then I think with Pradaxa, I think you're not going to see too many of these open label studies that are going to lead to approvals of products. Now, who really brings that about? I hate to say it, many times it's lawyers who advance claims for injured people. Because the only way that the system is really going to change in terms of how drugs get approved, and more importantly, I think, how companies act, is by lawsuits. And people say there are too much lawsuits and there's lawsuit abuse in the pharmaceutical setting. I can say that's 100% not accurate.
Because these cases are so expensive.
Cases are so expensive. Of all the drugs out there, I'm the first one to tell you that no drug is completely safe. However, and there are thousands and thousands of drugs that lawyers can sue if they so choose. And I get approached every day, sometimes a dozen to 20 times a day, by individuals that want to sue product X, Y, or Z, and I tell them they don't have a case. Simply because not every drug is, no drug is completely safe, and many times you get results that are, you get a adverse event that's been warned about. There's no lawsuit there at all. You were told that this could happen, and it's probably doing what's known as the risk-benefit, always is on the benefit. However, with drugs like Pradaxa, or I'll use the examples of Vioxx or Actos with bladder cancer, when you come to risk-benefit, what you see is that the risk, and many times it's the undisclosed risk, far outweighs any benefit from the drug, especially if it's what's known as a drug that has other options, meaning if it's in a class of drugs where the patient could take another drug within the same class that doesn't carry the same risks. Coumadin and Pradaxa is kind of the same thing.
And Vioxx was.
And Vioxx was what's known as a COX-2 inhibitor. Came to market in 1999, taken off in 2004. At the end, you found out that there was a lot of screwiness going on with the data that got Vioxx approved. And what you saw is Vioxx caused tens of thousands of heart attacks, upwards possibly, they've estimated, of 160,000 Americans died from heart attacks attributed directly to Vioxx. And there was no reason for that drug to really be on the market. And what they did is they pushed also some new indications for it. Give it to an Alzheimer's patient. Give it for pain. Give it for this. Give it for that. Anything to expand the profile of that drug. And as it turns out, we see a lot of Americans, that unfortunately now are in the grave because of Vioxx. One of the largest lawsuits in a long time was that Vioxx case. Took 4 long years of hard-fought battles by myself and a number of other attorneys to try to get that drug, first of all, taken off the market, and also to get adequate compensation for the victims of that drug.
Yeah. And oftentimes, sometimes the drug companies will change the warnings. Tylenol was an example of that. There is a certain dosage requirement on Tylenol, maximum dosage on Tylenol, and they changed that based upon some lawsuits.
Yep, based on lawsuits, and Tylenol, believe it or not, has always kind of had a good profile. If you remember, there was many years ago, this is kind of showing my age, there were some scares about poisons being in Tylenol. They would remove them immediately off the shelves. They have always kind of been a pretty good landmark of if there is a problem, they do something. They always don't do it right when they should, but in the end, they usually put patient safety ahead. But then there's other companies that I see, and I hate to pick on one, but there's one that I have been involved with many times, which is the Bayer Corporation, that is consistently involved in shenanigans with their products. Starting in Baycol way back in 2001, we see the birth control pill, Yaz and Yasmin.
Let's talk about Yaz and Yasmin.
Sure.
We did a commercial in the beginning of the show regarding Yaz as well. It's a birth control device. What's wrong with the pill? What's wrong with it? Well,
what I say is the birth control pill, has been around for decades. It's one of the most studied medical therapies in the world. Has a pretty good safety profile. If you take a pill, the pill, which meaning birth control, you do have a risk of getting what's known as a thrombotic event, a deep vein thrombosis, a heart attack, a pulmonary embolism, but the risk is very small. And it is disclosed on the label. They say you could get this, and they encourage you to not be too overweight, not to smoke. Definitely don't smoke if you're over 35 on the pill. But everyone's looking for the next best thing. First, we saw the Ortho Ever patch. okay? They put a patch on. Don't take a pill, put a patch. Turns out that was like a death patch. It's killing girls left and right, giving you too much birth control medication, which caused those thrombotic events to happen. Then you saw Yaz come out. Yaz came out in March 2006. Almost immediately, the FDA was flooded with very, very high numbers of these thrombotic events, pulmonary embolisms and DVTs in particular. And Bayer was taken to task. They would actually run ads and downplay these risks, purposely downplay those risks. And when they would talk about the risks, they'd have distracting things on the commercial. They'd turn up the music when they would talk about the risks, or they would have a dog barking or something that would distract the user. And the FDA actually forced them to run new ads correcting that. Now, that very rarely happens. And we saw a flood of lawsuits that are still going on with
Don't you see that often with commercials currently from the pharmaceutical companies? They have these commercials. Most commercials in today's market are 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Oftentimes the drug companies are running 1 minute or more, sometimes 2-minute commercials. Sometimes when it comes time to talk about the side effects and the disclosures of the drug, there's this lulling going on where you know, you have these scenes in the background that you're really paying attention to instead of listening to the voice of the narrator who's really talking about the side effects of the drugs.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what Bayer was taking to task for.
But they're still doing it.
They still do it, but I mean, if you saw those Yaz ads, they really were atrocious, and it was clear that that's exactly what they were doing. And like I said, the FDA actually made Bayer with Yaz actually run new ads and say essentially, sorry, we didn't tell you this. Now that doesn't do much for the girls that had a pulmonary embolism or had a DVT or are still suffering from a heart attack or a stroke from these. And I always think that with birth control pills, they're always looking for the better mousetrap. The regular old pill is pretty safe, but you saw the OrthoEver patch, you saw Yaz. Now you see NuvaRing.
Are they still selling Yaz?
Still saying Yaz. There's been some increasing to the warnings. It's not nearly the same as it used to be. It was a blockbuster drug for Bayer. It was they touted it as essentially as kind of like a more natural product, which people seem to really enjoy now. The idea that they're taking a greener pharmaceutical, but it was really it's just not a pill that anyone should be on. And we now see, which is another case, another pharmaceutical product that's for birth control, the NuvaRing. NuvaRing is manufactured by Merck. It's essentially a insertable, looks like a little ring. It's insertable once a month. Keep it in for 3 weeks, it does its work. However, once again, with NuvaRing, it's just that everyone's looking for that next big thing that they don't have to take a pill every day. And once again, we see this incredible increase in DVTs and pulmonary embolisms. And those are serious medical conditions. A pulmonary embolism is a life-threatening condition. A DVT, even though it's in your leg usually, deep vein thrombosis, can easily break off and go to your chest, go to your lungs, get pulmonary embolism, go to the brain, get yourself a stroke, go to the heart, get a heart attack. And the folks that have these can be on lifetime Coumadin, for example, to prevent those from happening, which will prevent them in many cases from being able to have children. It's just kind of a nightmarish scenario, you think, just to try to take a better birth control pill when there's a lot of other better options out there. But the Yaz and NuvaRing cases are ones that I represent a lot of young ladies who have taken those, and their stories are just absolutely horrific.
Are doctors still prescribing a NuvaRing?
Doctors are prescribing them, but not as much as other things. And I think based upon some of the adverse event data that's coming out, I think you're going to see a decrease in the prescriptions of NuvaRing. In terms of Yaz, you don't see hardly any Yaz anymore, just because of all the problems. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of lawsuits, and many of them are getting resolved now, just because I think Bayer is well aware that those cases are essentially unwinnable at trial. And
is there a difference between the actual devices that the drug companies come out with compared to the drugs, the pills, the serums, as far as how they get approved and the safety measures that are taken in each?
Yes, kind of what I say with the DePuy ASR hip. That's a medical device approved under a different process, and they approved that under that 501(k), that speedy approval process. Medical devices are treated differently. They're treated differently under the law, and they're also treated differently under the approval process. Under the law, there's some certain protections that drug company has for medical devices, simply because to develop a medical device is a major, major deal. And if you didn't give some more speedy approval process, you almost never would have a medical device. You wouldn't have a pacemaker, you wouldn't have other things. As long as they have some background in what is known as a substantially similar product is out there somewhere, you can get a medical device approved a lot more quickly. However, the problem with that is the whole epidemic of metal-on-metal hips. Way back in 2005, 2004, what you began to see is all the rage was taking a hip implant, and instead of making it from a porous material like ceramic or something, they said, let's make it metal. And we'll make the cup metal, we'll make the ball metal, it'll last forever. Right. You could have it in for 20 years. A hip implant's really supposed to last for about 15 years. The problem is that no one thought of this, is that when you have two pieces of metal rubbing against each other, even if they just look like they're being happy, little microscopic pieces of metal are coming off. And in the DePuy ASR case, we began to see the chromium and the cobalt began to essentially rub against each other, and everyone was getting poisoned by this. And it was a condition known as metallosis. And you'd have individuals then that had a failure of that hip after 1, 2, or 3 years. This is something supposed to last for 15 years.
Right. And have to have another surgery.
Have to have it come out, which is a major surgery. Any surgery is bad, especially on me, is major surgery. But if a hip implant is a life-changing operation, and to get one put in and then immediately put out, it's a lot of trauma on the body, it's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of resultant, and ancillary problems that can happen with the surgery. You're bedridden, you get pneumonia and all that stuff. But the metal-on-metal hips, which would be the ASR model, the DePuy Pinnacle hip, there's also the Stryker Rejuvenate, all these other metal-on-metal type of components are really bad, and you're really not going to see them anymore. Almost very, very few orthopedics use that.
Because of the lawsuits. That's why you're
Once
not
again,
going to see
because
them.
of the lawsuits. They wouldn't have done it without the lawsuits.
Right. So how about the hip replacements they're doing today?
I mean, like as to what ones are they doing?
They're safer than the metal on metal.
Well, they went back to the old standby. And what I always say is the one that's been used time and time again. You know, the old ceramic cup and something like that. More porous materials that the body likes, the body is used to. It's when you always try the new thing. If the doctor says, I've got something new for you, I probably would say I'll pass. I mean, you're pretty much being the guinea pig.
Does it make a difference if these devices and or drugs are available in Europe and they've been there for a number of years before they're brought here?
Well, it can and it cannot. I mean, sometimes Europe acts more quickly than the United States. And I'll use an example of the drug Actos. Actos is a drug that's used to treat diabetes, been around since 1999. Well, in June 2011, the FDA announces, hey, by the way, we've got a serious problem with Actos causing bladder cancer. And I have over 100 folks that I represent that have, some of them, I would say about 30% of them, males have had their bladders removed, which is a major, major surgery. Life-changing operation, and you have cancer. Now, that was never part of the bargain, was every drug has a risk, sure, but bladder cancer should never be part of that equation.
And we've got about 30 seconds left.
Oh, okay.
Can I finish the story?
Yeah, with bladder cancer, but back to your thing, Europe sometimes is ahead of our game on that one, but it took the U.S. about 5 years behind Europe.
Behind it.
So just because it's in Europe, that doesn't mean you should be taking it here in the United States.
Well, thank you for the great job you do, because you do change lives of a lot of people and make drugs safer for all of us. So if you have had a serious side effect from these drugs or any drugs, call me, call Mr. Lynch. But don't sit back and do nothing. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Ed.
Be sure to visit us online for more information about today's guests. To see past shows or even contacting us about being on the show, simply go to theedbernsteinshow.com. That's theedbernsteinshow.com.
Attention. If you have taken the blood thinner Pradaxa or dabigatran and have suffered or been hospitalized for internal bleeding or hemorrhagic stroke, you may be entitled to compensation. Call Edward M. Bernstein Associates immediately. Enough said. Call Ed 240-0000.